Okay, my name's John Wright and I'm looking after May, as long as I stay around long enough. Well, we never know, do we? We never know. So look, first thing we need to do is just establish a motivation or reason for being here. And really, there's various reasons that we do things, whether it's for some sort of external gain of some sort, or it's something more to do with, I guess I could use the word, our inner work or inner development, and try and develop our inner qualities. And in terms of those inner qualities, I think the most important thing we can work on is on our heart and developing our heart. And so we develop our heart from the sense of becoming a more warm person or a more caring and compassionate and kind person. So I'm inclined to think that's probably the most important thing we can do in this life, regardless of what other sorts of things we might achieve in our life. Really, at the end of the life, what is probably more important is how we developed ourselves as a person and how much we developed our kindness and care and concern for others, as opposed to how much we developed our bank account or the suburb we live in or our political prestige or reputation or whatever. Those things, in the end, don't count nearly as much. Now, what's more important is the sort of person we are, rather than the external things that we might have developed or had success in. So my mind motivation came in tonight sort of a little bit probably it's been all day just in terms of I'm trying to sit down and meditate. It's been a little bit unfocused and unsettled, and I've had trouble sort of pulling my mind in a bit. So to help me, we're going to do just a minute or two just to bring our mind in a fraction and just to contemplate our motivation or reason as to why we're attending tonight. So you're welcome to sort of close your eyes slightly, just draw your mind in and just do a quiet reflection on what is the purpose of why I'm here tonight and what am I trying to achieve. Okay, so hopefully we feel a bit more focused or centred now, and our mind's a fraction more clear. And I was just thinking, with our topic this period of time, if you read the news, there's about death and impermanence, and that's a topic that often doesn't get discussed. So I thought there'd be some value in discussing that. But normally when a Lama comes in and teaches, once they've done their prostrations, they sit on their seat. One of the things they'll do is click their fingers, just to remind them of death and impermanence. And also, of course, it helps pull the mind away from being ego-centred, or perhaps think, look, I'm here to be important, or for reputation or something like that. So now, of course, in my case, I completely forgot to do that, but then I don't have the qualities of the people who sit behind me when they come in and teach. Now, at the moment, I'm just scrambling through my pieces of paper. There's a particular quote I want to read out. And it's by a Lama called Lama Tsongkhapa, who lived about 600 years ago. And he was, I guess, one of the big famous figures in the history of Tibetan Buddhism. And he wrote a lot of text, but he also wrote some very short texts that cover the whole path, that there was something you could read through in 2 or 3 minutes or 5 minutes. And by reading that text, you've covered all the main points in the complete path from the beginning to full enlightenment. And so this verse goes, "The fluctuation of our body and life is like a bubble of water. Remember death, for we perish so quickly. After death, the effects from black and white karma pursue us as a shadow follows a body. Finding certainty in this, may I always be careful to abandon even the slightest need of action and to complete the accumulation of virtue. Inspire me thus." So that particular verse covers quite a lot of territory. But the starting point is that our actual life is very, very transient and in some respect very fragile, because he makes the analogy that's like a bubble of water. And of course we've all had experiences with bubbles before. They look very pretty, they float in the air for a while, then suddenly they pop and they're gone. So he's making the analogy that our life is a bit like that. And that's quite a powerful image for us and simple image for us to reflect on from time to time, just to bring that awareness to ourselves. Now, what I thought I'd do is just cover first of all, what do we actually mean by death? And there are obviously within our society there are different points of view. Within, I think, most religious traditions there is a belief that there's some existence after this life finishes. And from the Buddha's point of view, when we're talking about what we define as death, it's a separation of the consciousness from the body. So it's possible for a person to stop breathing, but the consciousness hasn't left the body yet. And how it's described in the traditional texts is that we've got a subtle body made up of energy of energy channels and winds which the mind rides on, and these will absorb into the central channel and then into the heart. So we're going from a gross level of consciousness to a subtle level of consciousness to a very subtle level of consciousness. Now, for some people, and I'm sure some of you had this experience of being with someone who's dying, you can feel that person's there for a while, although they've stopped breathing. But that presence of that person is still there in the room for a while, and it can take a while before they leave the body. In the case of people who are great meditators, they can actually, their concentration is so good that they're totally aware of this process and can absorb and they have this awareness in what's called the clear light stage at their heart. And they can stay in meditation for a period of days or weeks. And there are quite a few documented cases of lamas in the modern day who have stayed in meditation a number of days or weeks before the consciousness has left the body. And while that's been the case, the body hasn't started to decay. It stays fresh, And then at the point where the consciousness left, then at that point it can start to decay. So we define death as at the time when the consciousness leaves the body, and rather than when we stop breathing. So even for us, it doesn't. When we die, it doesn't mean one moment the breath stopped, next moment the consciousness gone. That process can take a while for us to occur. And of course, prior to that process, what's important is the state of mind that we have before that. And this is why we need to sort of prepare for death, rather than wait for the moment to prepare. We're far better off if we spend our life preparing. And like I said earlier, for example, the most important thing we can do is to develop our heart, and develop our inner qualities, our inner wisdom, those sorts of things, because that's what's going to help us most at that time. Now, having said all that, we do live in a culture or society where, I guess, a number of things. One, there are people who do not believe that there's some sort of existence after this life, and especially some aspects of modern science would say that, we've got a physical body. It's made up of cells. Those cells are programmed by our genetic code, etc. There's a whole bunch of biochemical processes that go on. And because we're an advanced multicellular organism, we have an advanced nervous system, in other words, bunches of neurons with little chemical messages firing off electrical signals, stimulating one neuron to the next. And because of that process, the interplay of neurons or nerve cells, we have the ability to think and even to feel emotions and things like that. And from that point of view, if you've got the belief that the mental activity we have is electrical activity or a physical sort of thing, and the body, of course, is physical, then when the body stops working, all that stops working as well, and there's nothing after this life. There's nothing. So that's one point of view. Another point of view, of course, is that our consciousness, I guess from the Buddhist point of view, we make it very clear distinction. There's the body and the consciousness operating together. But the consciousness is not a physical entity. Doesn't have colour, doesn't have form, doesn't have shape. It's a different entity to the physical entity which our body is. And so at the time of death, the body will stop working. It'll die. And it'll gradually rot away, and the atoms that make up our body might get fed to the worms or disintegrate. But that matter will keep recycling. And of course, this is basic physics. We do have things like various atoms we're made of don't disappear. They just become different combinations of other things. And the modern physicists like to talk about how we're made of stardust, because the atoms that we're made of originally were created in nuclear reactions inside stars, for example. But our consciousness is not physical form, so it's something that can't be destroyed. I guess we can still might say, I've got a consciousness. Does that consciousness go into another life, or did it come from a previous life as well? Now, if we have trouble with that, I guess the challenge for me, I'd set you a little challenge, is to trace back through your moments of awareness, moment by moment, back early through your life, tracking back as far as you can, and see if you can find the beginning of your consciousness. And that might be hard, but it's worth a try. Okay? So, of course, but the thing is, so basically the consciousness is going to continue to the next life. So when we start, from the point of view of Buddhist point of view, and obviously Christianity, Islam and Judaism all say the same things, but they'll use the word soul and say you'll go to your next life, which is usually going to be heaven or hell or some sort of equivalent to that. And Hinduism also have a similar sort of idea as well. Okay, having said all that, we've been brought up in a society that is very reluctant to talk about death, and very frequently is in denial about death, or wants to hide death, but definitely not talk about it. And it's interesting, I remember last year, I had to go in hospital for an operation, and my attitude, then when you have an operation, you go on anaesthetic. There's always a risk. Some people don't come out of anaesthetic. So there were some sorts of things I needed to hand over to my daughters. I wanted to go through my daughters. And it didn't work out as they were in terms of circumstance. But later on, one of my daughters said, Dad was just being morbid. I thought, this is an interesting insight. A person in their 20s say, yeah. And this was her viewpoint of me, because I was sort of talking about, look, I could die, I want to sort out some affairs. I was being morbid. And that's not an uncommon attitude at all. But of course, is it a healthy attitude for us? So, look, in our society we use lots of euphemisms for death. We talk about the person who's not with us anymore, or they've departed, or they left, or they're resting. There's a whole bunch of nice words we use to cover it up in some respect. But look, the reality is, it is a reality. There are people who die in the womb. There are people who die when they're babies. There are people who die when they're young kids. There are teenagers who will die. There are people in their 20s and 30s who die. There are people my age who die. And actually, when I was probably in my 20s, my life expectancy was about 67. It has improved, which would have meant that by the time that cohort of people got to 67, 50% were gone. And only 50% were remaining. I'm still in the group who are remaining, but I know there's quite a few who are no longer with us. In other words, they've died for various reasons. And we're all in the queue for that. But so, anyway, we have a society that worships youth, worships athleticism, worships material success, worships reputation. And I've noticed the last few years, for example, the prevalence of things like Botox, how we can pretend that we'd get rid of all those wrinkles and things in our face or wherever anything's saggy, have little operations to remove some of the saggy bits or whatever. And I think especially in America there's such a huge obsession with trying to make yourself look young. I know these days Hollywood has to come to Australia to find actresses who haven't had cosmetic surgery done to find people who look real, rather than some who look a little bit artificial. I shouldn't be that cruel, should I? But and the other thing is a lot of pressure. Men and women feel a lot of pressure to look beautiful, to not look old, all that sort of stuff. We dress in modern clothes and all that sort of stuff. Go to the gym to stay fit, although being healthy is actually important. I don't want to decry that, but if it's about this searching this, seeking the illusion of eternal youth, it's sort of silly from that point of view. Now look, why has this happened for us? And it seems if we look back in history, if we look at our own lives, I could say, when was the last time you saw a corpse, like a human corpse? And I was thinking about, for me, probably the last time was 20 years ago. Actually, no, 22 years ago was the last time I saw a corpse. As a young person in Australia, I never saw a human corpse. It's only when I started travelling, and especially in India, I started to see corpses. And if I was really keen to go and see corpses, I could go to somewhere like Varanasi on the Ganges River. I could go to the Yamuna River in Delhi, for example, and go to what were called the burning ghats, where the local Indian people would bring in their corpses, build a funeral pile, and they were burnt on the pile, completely in public sight. And that was very, very common. I remember seeing dead baby in a gutter, for example. Or one time in Bodh Gaya, there were a couple of young guys who were murdered. Their throats were cut, which is pretty horrific when you really think about it. It's so awful. But it was parts of Gaya, or sort of Bihar, which the state by Gaya is very dangerous. A lot of what Indians call dacoits or bandits. And so there's quite a degree of violence. So these two young guys were killed, and the police didn't know who they were. So, and this is back in the probably late 70s, early 80s. So it was before internet and all that sort of stuff. So they laid the bodies out in the front lawn of the police station. And they stayed there for a couple of days until someone came and said, we know this person. Well, very, very public. If you want to meditate on death and impermanence, remind yourself of that. Fantastic. But it's a very different culture to us. So in India, in Indian culture, probably death was far more public and people far more used to it. In our culture, it's very rare. Like, for example, children mostly don't die these days. It's very, very rare. If I look at my mother, for example, she was one of 5. Her oldest brother died as a 6-month-old baby. And this is in the night, probably around World War I or something like this happened. But that sort of thing was very, very, very common, that children would die. And I saw that in India as well, that children would die, just especially in village-type areas, but the healthcare wasn't that good. Children would commonly die. It's interesting, I went for a few friends earlier this year, and we were down near Inverloch. We went to a little cemetery, I think a place called Waratah, and they had a list of the names of the long-term residents, you could say. The people who'd been buried there. And all 3 of us, we're all in our 70s, and there was only one person, resident of that cemetery, who was older than us, or died at an age older than us. All the rest were younger. So, for example, a 1-day-old baby, a mother in her 20s who died 1 day later. So we know what happened there. Guys in their 20s, 30s, 40s, dying at I think 1 or 2 in their 50s. So it was very, very common. And in those days, that people were being exposed to loss and death on a really common basis. So it meant they were far more in touch with death and couldn't hide it, couldn't avoid it. In our case, we can avoid it. So we have a situation now, if someone gets really ill, we send them off to hospital. Obviously we're trying to look after and get them well, and that doesn't always happen. If they die in hospital, the hospital lets you stay there for a few hours with them, but they've got a prerogative or imperative that they need to move that body on. Whereas there's another sick person will come, because they'll need their bed for someone else. And then, of course, you've got the undertakers or the funeral parlour people who'll take that body away for you. Well, if we go back, 100 years ago, 150, 200 years ago, it was more likely the family was going to look after that body. So let's wash the body, dress the body, have them in their home. So again, there's far more exposure and awareness of death. This person's died. And of course, presumably the thought's going to enter your head, my time will come as well. So we really haven't had that exposure. And look, in one respect, it's very good that medical science has improved people's health and their longevity and all that. But the other side of it, of course, is we've lost our connection with our day-to-day relationship of death occurring for us. And we've ended up to some extent in denial. Now the problem, of course, is in terms of that, there's some big disadvantages. Because what it means is when our death comes, or even, for example, becoming old and fragile, that becomes emotionally very, very difficult for us to deal with. Because it's not something we've been able to push it aside. And the reality is, I look at myself, I've got these ambitions, I want to do a certain amount of meditation, try and develop more of my inner, work on that. But it's super easy to get distracted and put that time aside. So easy. I can get distracted, watching the rugby league, of course. I don't get distracted watching AFL, that's of no interest to me. The cricket, of course, it can go for 5 days, which is even more fantastic. I also like watching MasterChef, so I've got it on record at the moment. Or just go and hang out with friends, do a bit of this and that. And it's so easy to get distracted and lose that discipline every day, of doing a certain amount of meditation each day and that sort of thing. And just working on bringing the mind inside, developing awareness of the mind, doing these formal contemplations. Well, like for example, there's a 9-point 9-round contemplation on death awareness, which we'll save for next week. Those sorts of formal meditations that we can do to try and develop ourselves. So super, super easy to get distracted. And part of the reason for that is in terms of where our priorities lie. and a lack of awareness of the shortness of this life. Or remember we went back to this, says the fluctuation of our body and life is like a bubble of water. In other words, our life is very, very fragile, very transient. We just don't have that awareness. So we tend to lack a bit of motivation in terms of that. And so it becomes, so we don't do as much preparation we would like to do. This reality is, and it's interesting, one of my friends about 20 years ago said, everyone should have a little bit of cancer. And why was she saying that? Because it's sort of, that's something, if someone says you've got cancer, that's something that tends to cut through our intellect and hit us here and make us think, oh, I could die. What am I doing? And so it's actually really important for us to develop that awareness. I could die, and I could die any time. And of course, when I do die, what's important? Was it my job? Was it the type of car I've got? Was it the type of house I've got? Was it the possessions I've got? Was it my bank account? Or is it more, for example, the relationships I have with people and how I interact with people and that sort of thing? So it tends to push us to reevaluate how we're leading our life and what's more important. The more we think about that. Then what happens is, when we get to a point of crisis point in our life, it's less likely to be a shock or a huge surprise. And it's interesting, for a lot of people, they get told, you've got cancer, or you've got this or that. It's a big shock. It's like, they really struggle to cope. And then, of course, that's getting cancer, in one respect, sort of a minor thing. Dying is much bigger, because when you die, this body, which we treasure, we're no longer with. Our family and friends we're separated from. Our possessions we're separated from. Otherwise, there is total loss. And we know sometimes when we have a small loss like that, someone steals something from our house, that upsets us quite a bit. And we can hang on to that for quite a while, and not let go. And so that actually disturbs our inner equilibrium, can disturb our inner equilibrium quite strongly. So we can imagine something like being told you're going to die, or actually die. That's a huge shock for us. It's it's a massive change. It's a big, big change for us. And the thing is, are we mentally equipped or emotionally equipped to handle that? And some people may be, some of us may not. But if we're not emotionally equipped for it at the moment, then we need to think, should we be doing some preparation to get to a point where, when we get that sort of news or experience, it's actually not a shock for us, and in the best case scenario, it can actually be a joyful experience. It can actually be something you're looking forward to. And when they talk about the different levels of meditation practice or doing our inner work, you can die, actually I don't want to die yet, but I've got no regrets. Or you think, actually, you're actually looking forward to it because you've prepared so well, you're ready for it. And I think one Australian monk called Gyatso, who used to be in Bendigo, he's sort of like, he's from the hippie era, so he'd say, bring it on, man. Was his comment. He's done a lot of retreats. He's actually in retreat now. He's done 3-year retreat, done amazing stuff. So started a monastery in France, worked at the centre in Mongolia, worked in Taiwan. Spent his adult life, once he stopped being from his 30s, he's now in his 80s, just working for others. So, very, very dedicated and devoted. So he's really relaxed and just looking forward to it. I'm not at that level yet, but look, this is where we're aiming for. And I sort of looked up the internet to see, what did the internet say about all this sort of stuff? And one of those comments was, it's a very powerful catalyst for personal growth and changing habits. And I guess that's probably self-evident now in terms of how I've been talking. It sounds very strong that way. I then did find a few more things, and it says, this is interesting, it will make us healthier. And you're probably thinking, how does that work? And the reason for that it takes us beyond thinking about the moment. It pushes us into some long-term thinking, and therefore motivates us. I need to look after my health better. I need to get my blood tests every year, my screening for this and that sort of every year. And so as a result of that, it's a motivator for health and fitness. And so we live longer. We have the potential to live longer. Isn't that interesting? So it's not so morbid after all. Unless you live longer feeling morbid all that time. The next one, it makes you happier. It actually elevates your mood and makes you happier. And part of the reason is, when we're buried in the moment, it's like me, it's me, it's me, it's me. If you start thinking about death, etc., then it starts to take you out of this strong sense of I and opens you out a bit to become more aware the world is bigger than me. And it's a bit bigger than just my personal problems. So we start to sort of widen our focus away from a narrow focus. We'll be happier. And again for me, that's sort of self-evident. The next one, you will care more for others. And it then goes again, so it said there's an increased desire for forgiveness and reconciliation and a reduced desire for others to be harmed. Now I know certainly as you open your heart more, and as we say, you sort of got more warmth and care towards others, it becomes more painful or even unbearable to think of harming others or seeing others being harmed by others is part of that. So, and the other thing, I can think of my lady I used to visit just in palliative care quite a few decades ago. What was interesting, that she didn't have a particularly good relationship with her daughter. And so she's very aware she was dying. And I was visiting her very regularly at that time. So she actually got me to write a whole bunch of letters, like letters to friends, but also to her daughter. Trying to explain things and try to build or do some reconciliation with her daughter in particular. But yeah, that was really clear. And she also, with friends, what she really wants to say, look, my health, my body's falling apart, I'm on the process of dying, thank you for your friendship, goodbye. But she couldn't say that. So she said, look, the weather's nice, I'm in hospital at the moment, it's all okay, thanks for everything. Just a few sort of things, but it was quite interesting. But it sort of illustrates something. There are people who, once they're aware they're going to die, or in this case we're talking about death awareness, seek out to, finish off, deal with unfinished business, which means so if there's a conflict, trying to resolve that conflict and have some reconciliation. So being aware of death helps us in terms of how we look after and nurture our relationships with people. If we're less aware of that, we don't care as much, and we're probably, more hard-hearted. Next one, your personal goals will be better prioritised. So in other words, work will matter less and family and friends will matter more. And again, that's sort of self-evident. Look, we all have to work, and of course we can use work as a training ground for developing a good heart and benefiting others, rather than seeing it as a obstacle to our practice, etc. But ultimately, it's our relationships with people that are more important than how much we've earned at work. And I think the guy I used to work with, he used to be an engineer, and he got paid a lot of money, but he got no enjoyment from it. So he ended up in teaching maths and physics, and he had a huge salary cut and had to work longer hours. But he got a lot more personal satisfaction out of doing that. So he was much, much happier as a result of that. So so what we can see here is your personal goals or values. Death awareness can help with that. And the fifth one, which is really, really interesting, it's not one I would have thought, it says you will appreciate art more. But it actually specified surrealism type art. I don't know much about art, but I think surrealism is not sort of literal art. You've got to look at and decode the images. And if you've got more aware of death and impermanence and change, then you can understand what the artist is trying to convey better. That might ring true for some of you, but I don't tend to go and look at art, so we'll take... Then, so it's the last one, you will die better. And that's sort of pretty obvious. So that's just something I've pulled off the internet. Oh my goodness, I've gone long. I haven't even got to the Buddhist list. And Buddhism loves lists. So we'll have to cover it next time, won't we? So the first part of the list is the disadvantages of not remembering death, and the second list is the advantages of remembering death. So to some extent there's quite a bit of overlap. There's definitely some overlap there, but it's quite interesting. Okay, we better do some meditation. So, I wonder what we should meditate on. We could say that for next week. Okay, so with meditation, the main thing is you've got a nice, in terms of your posture, you've got a nice straight back. And then the mind is clearer and straighter. And the energy channels are more straight as well. So the mind, and then with a nice straight back, right hand on top of the left, thumbs touching above the second fingers, elbows slightly out, head tilted forward very slightly, eyes slightly open but not fully closed, and the tongue touches basically the top of your mouth, the palate of your mouth, just behind your top teeth. And that'll keep your saliva, your mouth won't dry out or get too wet. So what we'll do first of all is just to focus our awareness on the breath coming in and out. And as the breath comes in and out, our abdomen is moving up and down. And we're not trying to regulate our breath at all. We're just being aware of our breath. And as we focus our awareness on our breath, the thoughts and the chatter and the business in our mind will start to quieten down. If thoughts or chatter arise, we don't judge them in any shape or form. We just go back to the breath, and their energy will naturally dissipate, and our mind will start to become more calm and still again. So we'll do this for a number of minutes. So when we're breathing out, every time we breathe out, we breathe in again. However, there will come a time when the breath will go out and it won't come back in. So that all that's separating us from death is whether that breath comes back in or not. So just sort of give that some thought, and when you get a feeling, whether it's fear or death awareness, just sit with that feeling without judging it and sort of marinate yourself in that feeling for a little while. So let's bring our awareness back to the breath. And then we're ready, we can open our eyes and look around. Okay, so we've got roughly 10 minutes left. Is there any questions or comments from anyone? I am slightly deaf, so if I don't hear you the first time, apologies for that if I mishear you. Yes?
In Buddhism, how long should you be above the ground when you die?
Sorry, how long should what be above the ground? Okay, so the question is in Buddhism, how long should your body be above the ground? I think the main thing is, while the consciousness is in the body, then we need a really peaceful, quiet environment. You can have people doing formal recitation of prayers and meditation, etc. But once the consciousness is left, then I don't think it matters too much. Whether then the body can be buried or cremated, or in Tibet they used to had what was called a sky burial, where the bodies were chopped up and fed to vultures. Yes. But in Australia, we're not going to feed our bodies to the vultures, are we?
We do bury them.
No, look, because normally in Australia, the funeral people take the body, they'll put them in cool rooms, they'll put they might put some preservative in, some formalin, for example, or formaldehyde, I should say. But look, it's up to the other people around as to how they dispose of the body and how long that takes. But the main thing is to make sure the consciousness has left the body. And I can think of a story that one time in Nepal, I wasn't there, I heard this from other people, that Lama Zopa went with a group of students to a place called Pashupatinath, which is in Kathmandu Valley. And there's a very, very big Hindu temple there with a river just outside, and this is where they cremate people. And Lama Zopa made this comment that there was a body there where the consciousness hadn't left yet. That was, in queue to be cremated. Because, and look, it can take, even for an ordinary person like us, it can take 2 or 3 days for the body to leave. That is possible. Sorry, for the consciousness to leave. That is possible. Yes.
Thank you for the session. Just trying to phrase this. So, I can see that awareness of death is beneficial if you believe in an afterlife or cause and effect, karma. But I also see it as, particularly people my age and younger, as awareness of death is a good excuse to do self-fulfilling or hedonic activities.
Oh, you've got the
agree with that, what I'm trying to get at there?
yes, the YOLO attitude.
YOLO, yeah.
You only live once, so therefore you can be as hedonistic as possible. It's a challenge. But I think I had a kid say that to me once. He was a bit of an idiot, sorry, but he did get better as he got older. I think it's an immature attitude, is the long one. In all honesty, I think if you've got proper death awareness, you're not going to have that'll knock down the hedonistic attitude. Because hedonistic attitude's all about ego, and one of the advantages of death is we've got this sort of grasping at self and this false sense of I, which we have consider as permanent, unchanging, all that sort of stuff. And so traditionally, in terms of Buddhism, they talk about meditations on emptiness in order to deal with that. And that's the ultimate way to deal with it. But the temporary way to deal with it is through meditation on death. So the more death awareness you have, that's going to dampen your sense of ego and that strong sense of I. It'll reduce it. And that should therefore reduce the hedonistic behaviour, if there's true awareness of death. Does that answer make sense?
No, it does.
Yeah.
If you're in, a Buddhist circle where you can understand the true awareness of death.
But you're right.
They have the wrong idea.
Yes. Yeah, there's a complete lack of it. To me, it's reflective of a complete lack of awareness, and this sort of whole thing of having not been. I was talking about earlier, having not been exposed to death. Yeah, and it's very interesting. So I know I was in a high school, teaching a high school, there's 18 or 1900 kids who are year 11 and 12, so they're 16, 17, 18 years old. And in that time I was there were a couple of times when kids died. That age group and cars, for example, aren't a good combination. Or in one case, this girl just got a fatal liver disorder and died. But the kids didn't have the emotional tools or equipment to know how to deal with that. And it was really interesting watching these kids and how they operated in that situation. But they just hadn't been brought up with it. And so they didn't know. And because it wasn't an experience they'd ever had before, they really genuinely didn't know how to deal with it. Someone their own age who just died suddenly. They've had, I guess in many cases kids have had grandparents or great-grandparents die. But that's someone who in their mind is old and it's sort of semi-expected. With someone their age, they don't expect it. So, it's interesting. Yes? Okay, the question is, how do you know when the consciousness has left the body? And that's not basic at all. Look, they talk about there's a red seed and the white seed. So if you have blood coming out of the nose, the white seed be coming out of the sexual organs. Coming out, that's the traditional way of how it's described. The other thing is, if you've got people who are quite aware, which I'm not, they can sort of sense when a person's left. Has anyone in this room had that experience? Do you want to talk about it or not?
My dad died 8 years ago, and we sat with him for, he had a mild head injury because he was on blood thinners, so we knew he was going to die for about a week, and we had the last night of his life, me and my mum and my brothers and sister-in-laws, we all sat around him for 8 hours, and he just kept hanging on. He didn't want to leave my mum. Couldn't speak or anything, but I knew he didn't want to leave my mum. And it got to about 8 in the morning, and we all left the room. I was smoking a little bit, I was smoking cigarettes, then I went out for a cigarette. Mum went to the toilet, my brothers went out. We all just left the room, and when we came back in, Dad had gone. And I was giving him Reiki the whole night. As soon as I put my hands on him, I was thinking he was just gone. I could just feel that he was no longer. He waited until we all left the room, and then he left. I could just feel his body, there was nothing in it.
Yeah, it's just, yeah. And yes.
Yeah, I used to be a critical care nurse, and so I had a lot of exposure to people dying, and I literally you could feel almost like a consciousness jumping out the body sometimes. And other times much slower. You could just feel the difference.
Yeah. So you've got that sensitivity.
How does that feel like?
The question was, how did that feel like?
The first time it happened to me, I was shocked. When I was quite a young nurse, and then it became quite a common thing. That I just knew. You just did know, you could feel it.
You can feel it. It's like holding your hand. It's like if you hold a dead fish or a chair or whatever. There's no life in it. The way I would describe it was just like it was. My dad's not there anymore. It was just like that was a piece of matter. It wasn't. His soul wasn't in there anymore. You just feel the life. There's no life in it.
Yeah. So what you're looking at is what's left over once the life is gone. Which is one, yeah. I guess the other, it's again in our society, it's not that often. Sometimes we get the experience to sit with someone who's dying, but we don't often get a lot of experience at doing that. So that makes it a bit harder. I mean, you're fortunate you've had that experience here. You know what to look at, so you know what to recognise, but for the rest of us, we have less experience that way, so it's not as easy to gain that experience and that trust in our ability to sort of detect that or be aware of it. Yeah. So on that cheerful note, yes, there's the lawyer speaking. Or we shouldn't say that. Look, we do need to be practical, pragmatic, leave less things for your family to sort out. That's definitely true.
You also need a death list of who to ring, so friends don't get a shock when they ring up to ask you about the money.
Yeah, and the basics of, look, what do you want done when you die, before you die, at the time you die. That's all that pragmatic stuff, without a doubt. That's important, but some people don't want to do it because it's like, I'm being morbid, which is not so smart. Or I was thinking I was thinking this, a couple of guys who were cleaners. The head cleaner guy, he retired, and a year or so later he got cancer. So he retired at 65. A couple of years later he had cancer. He was terminally ill. And a couple of guys who were close to him used to work with him. They'd say, "Oh, Harold's really sick." I said, "Oh, do you go and visit Harold?" No, I can't do that. And I thought he would love to. They didn't want to see him like that. And I think you guys really need. He needs to see that you guys still care for him and think about him. It just really blew my mind that these guys were so frightened, I guess you'd say, or uncomfortable with seeing how their friend would be, they just wouldn't go near him. And sort of left him alone to die, so to speak. Anyway, that's a whole nother story, isn't it?
My next door neighbour, who was in her 90s, had refused treatment for cancer to come back. And she knew she was dying, and the doctor said, look, really, you're probably coming to hospital if you stay here fine, but you really are going to be dead in a day or two. So she took to ringing all her friends, which I thought was quite good to say goodbye, but at the funeral they kept saying, did she ring you? Really upset, she wrote, she said, I'm ringing to say goodbye. And I thought that was quite lovely in some way.
It is,
But
yeah.
it was a shock for some of them.
Yes, it is. Okay, so I'm looking around, I see a whole bunch of happy smiling faces. So we haven't made you depressed or miserable at all. Okay, so let's just close our eyes. What we need, because we've had a fabulous discussion and wonderful contributions, just dedicate the positive energy that we've made or directed, that it becomes a cause for both ourselves and others to develop death awareness, and more importantly, that both we can help others both develop our own selves and help others, and especially at the time of death we're able to have a calm, peaceful mind which is focused on the well-being of others, and of course with the ultimate goal that we can help all beings to achieve incredible inner growth and progress through how we lead our life, and also through how we die, that we can inspire others. Okay, thank you everyone, and as usual there's some tea and biscuits set in the kitchen if you want to have before you go. I'll hang around for a little while before I disappear. So thanks everyone, and hopefully we'll all be here next week.